I'm Barry Strayer. I retired a few years ago. I was a federal court judge for 21 years. Before that, I was an advisor to the Government of Canada, born in Saskatchewan, and I never lived in Moose Jaw, but I was born there because it was the closest hospital, and that's stamped in my passport, place of birth, Moose Jaw, and that every once in a while gives people a cause for laughter or confusion. So I grew up partly on the farm, went to a village school for several years, but my parents, we used to go to the United States for winters often, so I had some of my schooling in the United States. And then my parents bought a house in Regina when I was starting high school, and I did my high school and so forth from there on. Anyway, I used to spend summers on the farm and always had the farm connection. Then went on to the University of Saskatchewan, and then came back after my graduate studies at Oxford and worked in Saskatchewan for a number of years. So I always felt loyal to Saskatchewan. I was reluctant to leave, but the work here was very challenging, and I couldn't resist it. And I must confess that after a few years, we found the Ottawa winters easier to take than Saskatchewan winters. I guess I had a bit of a reputation by this time as a constitutional law professor, and I'd been doing some writing and publishing, and I just published my first book, which was part of my thesis for Harvard. And I also happen to know people who were involved in constitutional work in Ottawa, and I was phoned to see if I could get a leave of absence from the university to come for 1 year to help them on the reform project. And I came, and it took longer than a year. I had been certainly one of the main architects of the Charter. I first came for a summer in '67, and Mr. Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, had just become Minister of Justice, and he was also put in charge of constitutional reform. And he was very much interested in having a Charter of Rights, Bill of Rights set out in the Constitution that would be protected against intrusions by Parliament or the legislatures. Mr. Trudeau had just been re-elected to Parliament, having lost the government in 1979. His government was re-elected in 1980, so he was feeling pretty foxy and thought he could get things done. Mr. Trudeau and his government decided they would try to get the Constitution amended without necessarily having the support of some or all of the provinces. But we finally went ahead and adopted the Charter, which came into effect in April of 1982. Back in the 1970s, while we were still struggling to get an agreement on the Constitution here, I was asked to go to the Republic of Seychelles, Commonwealth country, and as quite often happened, there had been a coup d'etat. The leader of the opposition had taken over from the elected president and proclaimed himself president, and he promised the people of Seychelles that within 2 years there'd be a new constitution and he'd hold elections under a new constitution. He finally asked for help from the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. They asked me if I would go and help. So I went over there for a few weeks, and I had a drafter with me, and we produced a constitution for them. Fortunately, they'd had a commission which had been going around the islands asking people what they would like to see in a constitution. And so we met with the commission and had their conclusions. We tried to build those into the new constitution. And so I was, of course, honored to join the many distinguished people in the Order of Canada. Well, I was very pleased with that. The citation which they read out when it's presented recognized the work I'd done on the Charter.